She doused him in expensive perfume, phone ready to capture his humiliation for her followers. But the tomb sentinel didn't break. His chilling silence was the start of a storm that would shatter her world. The air at Arlington National Cemetery carried a unique weight, a blend of profound sorrow and unwavering pride. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the rising sun cast long, reverent shadows across endless rows of stark white headstones. Each marker stood in silent, perfect formation, a tribute to lives given in service. The scent of freshly cut grass, cool and clean, mingled with the distant melancholic notes of a lone bugler practicing taps. This was hallowed ground, a place where the very silence spoke volumes. At the heart of this sacred amphitheater stood the tomb of the unknown soldier, a gleaming monument of white marble that seemed to absorb the morning light. And guarding it was Sentinel Caleb Voss. At 30 years old, Caleb moved with a precision that bordered on supernatural. His bearing was a testament to the brutal, relentless training that forged tomb guards, a process that broke more men than it made. His deep blue uniform was immaculate, the creases sharp enough to cut glass, the brass buttons shining like small suns. His white gloves were pristine, a stark contrast to the M14 rifle he held with practiced ease. The subtle, faded marks of sweat that had soaked through and dried on his uniform collar, and the slight were on the leather of his gloves from a million practiced movements, were the only hints of the human effort behind the perfect facade. Behind his dark, impassive sunglasses, his eyes were fixed on a point in the middle distance, a gaze that saw through the crowd, through the trees, into a space defined by duty alone. 21 steps. Click-clack. The sound of his steel-tapped shoes echoed, a metronome of discipline. Turn. Pause for 21 seconds. 21 steps back. It was a living ritual, a heartbeat for the soul of a nation. The crowd gathered was a tapestry of America. Families trying to teach their children about history, solemn veterans adorned with medals, and curious tourists, their cameras clicking softly. They spoke in hushed tones, their respect a tangible presence. But not everyone had come to pay their respects. Isabel Sterling arrived like a crack in a perfect pane of glass. A luxury brand consultant in her early 40s, she moved with the aggressive confidence of someone who believed the world was her personal backdrop. She wore a sharply tailored black Chanel-style suit, its severe lines a stark contrast to the gentle, rolling hills of the cemetery. A pair of oversized sunglasses, so dark they looked like voids, hid her eyes, and a limited edition Hermes Birkin bag swung from her arm like a weapon. The sharp, imperious clicks of her stiletto heels on the stone walkway were an assault on the morning's tranquility. She was in town for a conference, but the chance to capture some solemn chic content for her social media was too good to pass up. Honestly, the lighting here is divine, she'd said to her assistant earlier. Now, navigating the respectful crowd, her patience wore thin. She sighed dramatically, a sound loud enough to turn heads. "Is this it?" she muttered to herself, pulling out her phone. "They just walk." She pushed past a young military family, the corner of her Birkin bag bumping a small boy holding a tiny American flag. "Watch it," the father said, his voice low but firm. Isabel shot him a look of pure contempt over the rim of her sunglasses before moving on, completely unapologetic. She found a spot near the velvet ropes marking the restricted area. Her crimson-painted lips twisted into a pout. Caleb Voss continued his patrol, a human pendulum of honor, seemingly oblivious to the disruption. To Isabel, he wasn't a soldier, a guardian, a man. He was an obstruction, an inconvenient part of the scenery that was ruining her shot, and she was about to make him her problem. Caleb's entire being was focused on the rhythm, the 21 steps, the weight of the rifle, the internal recitation of the Sentinels' creed. His training had been a crucible designed to burn away every distraction, every ego-driven impulse, until only duty remained. He was a living symbol, and symbols did not get annoyed. They did not get distracted. They simply were. He was aware of the woman in the black suit, just as a mountain is aware of a cloud passing before it. A transient, meaningless presence. Isabel, however, was used to being the mountain, the center of any landscape she occupied. She held up her phone, framing a shot of the tomb with herself in the foreground. But Caleb's relentless march kept intersecting her perfect angle. A flicker of genuine anger crossed her face. This wouldn't do. She wasn't just taking a picture. She was curating her brand. She went live on Instagram. "Hey, darlings," she purred into her phone, her voice a slick, artificial confection. "I'm here at this lovely memorial. So much history." But she paused for dramatic effect, flipping the camera to show Caleb's unyielding march. "I'm trying to capture a moment of reflection for you all, and this guard is being just a little uncooperative." A few people nearby glanced at her, their brows furrowed in disbelief. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd. But Isabel was in her element, performing for her unseen audience. Honestly, you'd think they could just stand still for a minute. Is that too much to ask? She moved closer to the velvet rope, her voice rising in volume. "Excuse me," she called out, the words sharp and demanding. "Hello, Mr. Soldier? Could you maybe take a 5-minute break? You're ruining my aesthetic." Caleb didn't even seem to register the sound. His turn was as sharp as ever, his pause as profound. His silence was a wall, and Isabel, used to every wall crumbling before her, felt a surge of indignation. This was not how things worked. She was Isabel Sterling. People responded to her. "Oh, I see what this is," she said, her voice dripping with scorn as she turned her commentary back to her phone. "It's one of those guys, the strong, silent type who thinks his uniform gives him a free pass to be rude." She then took it a step further, inventing a narrative for her followers. "And frankly, the way he keeps staring, it's a little intimidating. It's that aggressive male gaze, you know? I'm feeling very uncomfortable. Is this what our taxes pay for? Harassment." The lie hung in the sacred air, ugly and profane. An elderly man in a VFW hat shook his head slowly, his disappointment palpable. A young father quietly steered his children away, murmuring, "Let's go see the eternal flame. We don't need to see this." The crowd was subtly shifting away from her, creating a small pocket of isolation around her self-made drama. But Isabel interpreted their retreat as validation. She felt emboldened. "I'm not going to be silenced," she declared, her voice now shrill. "I have a right to be here, a right to feel safe. And you," she pointed a long, manicured finger at Caleb, "are failing at your job." Caleb Voss completed another turn. His face, hidden behind the glasses, remained a mask of pure discipline. He was the wall, and Isabel Sterling, in her rage and narcissism, was about to hurl herself against it. The line had been drawn, not by the velvet ropes on the plaza, but by centuries of tradition and sacrifice. And Isabel Sterling, blinded by her own reflection in her phone screen, was about to cross it. The silent, stoic refusal of the guard was no longer just an annoyance. It was a personal affront, an intolerable challenge to her authority. Her world was built on the principle that she could command attention, and this man's disciplined indifference was dismantling it brick by brick. Unbelievable, she seethed, more to herself than to her online audience. Her hand, trembling slightly with rage, disappeared into the cavernous interior of her Birkin bag. Her fingers rummaged past a wallet, keys, and high-end cosmetics, searching for a specific weapon. "Some people just need to be taught a lesson," she muttered, her lips a thin, cruel line. She pulled it out. It was a bottle of perfume, Eclat Noir, one of her clients' most expensive and aggressive fragrances. The crystal bottle was a work of art, faceted and heavy, and it glittered coldly in the autumn sunlight. To Isabel, it was a symbol of power and femininity. In this moment, it was her ammunition. With a defiant toss of her head, she unclipped the velvet rope and took a deliberate step into the restricted area. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. It was a shocking, unthinkable act. This was sacred ground, and she had just violated it with the casual arrogance of someone stepping onto their own lawn. A park ranger, positioned further down the plaza, saw the movement and immediately began to walk towards her, his expression grim. But he was too far away. Isabel marched towards Caleb, her heels clicking a frantic, angry rhythm on the stone. "You think you're untouchable?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. She was now just a few feet from him, well within his personal space. He continued his march, his body programmed to execute the mission, even as the threat escalated. She raised the bottle, her thumb poised over the atomizer. A malicious smirk twisted her features as she raised her phone with her other hand, ready to film the climax of her drama. "Let's see how stoic you are now," she whispered. With a sharp, vicious press of her finger, a fine mist of éclat noir erupted from the bottle. She aimed it directly at Caleb's face. The cloud of perfume, thick with alcohol and heady floral notes, enveloped him. It was a sensory assault. The potent, cloying scent instantly filled the air, a profane violation of the clean, solemn atmosphere. For a split second, the mist hung around his head like a toxic halo before condensing on his skin, his uniform, and the dark lenses of his sunglasses. Droplets of the expensive liquid ran down his stoic face like oily tears, soaking into the pristine blue fabric of his jacket, leaving dark, spreading stains on his shoulder and chest. The crowd fell into a stunned, horrified silence. The air crackled with the sheer audacity of her act. Isabel held her pose, phone recording, her smirk widening. She was waiting for the reaction. The cough, the sputter, the flinch, the angry shout. She was expecting him to break, to crumble, to give her the satisfying clip of his humiliation that would surely go viral. But Caleb Voss did not break. He didn't even blink. He completed his step, planted his foot, and continued his march, uninterrupted. The only sign of the assault was the glistening stain on his uniform and the overpowering, nauseating scent that now followed him like a shroud. Isabel's triumphant smirk faltered, then melted away completely, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. "No," she whispered, her phone lowering slightly. "That's impossible. He should be rubbing his eyes, gasping for air. He should be reacting. He was supposed to be human." Before she could process his inhuman composure, Caleb's voice cut through the stunned silence. It was not a shout, but it carried the force of a thunderclap, a voice honed on parade grounds and amplified by absolute authority. "Ma'am, you have crossed a line that is not marked by a velvet rope. Step back now." The words were precise, devoid of anger, yet they held an undeniable command. Isabel froze, the phone feeling heavy and useless in her hand. The crowd, released from its paralysis, began to murmur, the sound growing from a whisper to a low roar of condemnation. Phones were now universally raised, but they were no longer capturing a spectacle. They were documenting a crime. The park ranger was closing in fast, but another figure moved faster. An older man, who had been standing at the edge of the crowd, pushed his way forward. He wore a faded jacket with the insignia of the 1st Cavalry Division, and his face was a roadmap of a life lived with purpose. This was Marcus Thorne, a veteran of Desert Storm, and he moved with the calm urgency of someone who recognized a fellow soldier in distress. "Stand easy, Sentinel," Marcus said, his voice a gravelly comfort as he reached Caleb's side. He ignored Isabel completely, as if she were nothing more than a piece of trash on the wind. From a small military-style backpack, he produced a simple green army canteen and a clean, folded khaki handkerchief. His hands were steady, practiced, the hands of a man who had likely done this under far worse conditions. With a quiet efficiency, he unscrewed the canteen and poured a small amount of water onto the handkerchief. "Seen my share of tear gas drills," he said, loud enough for the entire plaza to hear. "This stuff is probably more expensive, but the principle's the same." He gently, respectfully, began to wipe the perfume from Caleb's face and sunglasses, his movements careful not to interfere with the guard's rigid posture. Caleb remained at attention, allowing the veteran's assistance, a silent acknowledgement passing between the two generations of servicemen. Marcus looked at the dark stains spreading on Caleb's uniform. "Served 2 tours in Kuwait," he continued, his gaze finally shifting to a now pale Isabel. "I breathed in burning oil wells. I've had sand in places you couldn't imagine. You know what we called a real threat, ma'am? Not a bottle of perfume. His words hit her like physical blows. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their disapproval now a palpable force. "That uniform," Marcus said, his voice rising with a righteous anger he had clearly held in check for years. "That uniform has been through hell and back, on battlefields whose names you probably can't even pronounce. It's earned with sweat and blood, with sacrifices you can't comprehend. It's a symbol that allows a man to stand tall, while a person like you tries to tear him down with cheap theatrics." Caleb, his face now clear of the oily residue, but his eyes still red and burning behind the lenses, stood even taller. The water had left its own dark patches on his uniform, but they looked like badges of honor, a testament to the respect he commanded from his brothers in arms. Isabel stumbled backward, her heel catching on a seam in the pavement. She swayed, her carefully constructed composure shattering like cheap glass. The park ranger finally arrived, placing a firm hand on her arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." I was just," she stammered, but her voice was lost in the growing chorus of disgust from the crowd. No one was listening to her anymore. The stage she had so desperately wanted was hers, but the role she was playing was that of the villain. Isabel was being escorted away, but Caleb Voss wasn't finished. He took a single, deliberate step forward, halting his patrol. This was a break in protocol so rare that it caused the entire plaza to fall into a breathless silence. He removed his sunglasses. For the first time, the crowd saw his eyes. They were not angry. They were not filled with hate. They were a startling, clear blue, red-rimmed from the chemical assault, but filled with a profound, weary clarity. And they were locked directly on Isabel Sterling. "You wanted a reaction," he said, his voice resonating across the stones, clear and strong. "You wanted content. Let me give you some." He gestured with his chin towards the marble sarcophagus. "My silence is not weakness. It is a vow, a promise I made to the men who lie here, and to every man and woman buried on these hills. It is the sound of my respect, something you clearly know nothing about." Isabel's face crumpled. These were not the performative tears she used to manipulate boardroom executives. These were tears of genuine, soul-crushing shame. "You accuse me of staring," Caleb continued, his voice dropping slightly but losing none of its power. "You're right. I was staring. We're trained to fix our gaze on a single point to maintain our bearing. But my focus isn't on a tree or a building. We're trained to focus on the memory of our fallen brothers. I was looking through you, ma'am, at a firefight in a dusty village in the Middle East where I watched better men than me give their lives, so that people like you could have the freedom to stand here and desecrate their memory." The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of his words. Marcus Thorne stood nearby, his head bowed slightly, not in prayer, but in solemn agreement. "This uniform," Caleb said, touching the stained fabric on his chest, "is not a costume. It's a legacy. The fabric of this jacket holds the ghosts of Normandy, the mud of the Mekong Delta, the dust of Fallujah. The medals pinned to it were earned in places you only see on the news, for acts of courage you could never comprehend. You thought you could diminish that legacy with Eclat Noir?" He almost scoffed at the name. "Your world is made of clicks, likes, and shares. A world of temporary, fleeting validation. This world," he swept his hand across the vista of headstones, "is built on permanence, on duty, honor, and sacrifice. You attacked me with a bottle of perfume because you felt ignored. I've carried a wounded comrade 2 miles under enemy fire. I have felt real pain, ma'am. The kind that comes when you put another person's life before your own. That is the creed of this uniform. That is what you failed to understand." Isabel sank to her knees, a choked sob escaping her lips. Her expensive sunglasses slipped from her head and clattered onto the pavement. Her phone, which she had dropped earlier, lay nearby, its screen shattered. Her Birkin bag tipped over, its contents, lipstick, a gold pen, a compact mirror, spilling out onto the sacred ground, a pathetic and profane collection of vanities. It was a perfect, devastating metaphor for her own unraveling. Caleb put his sunglasses back on, the the barrier between his world and hers restored. The Tomb Guard is not a tourist attraction. We are active-duty combat soldiers who volunteer for this post. We are here to guard those who can no longer speak for themselves. We are their voice. And what you did today, the insult was not to me. It was to them. He paused, letting the final words land with the force of a judge's gavel. You have your reaction. I pity you. As if summoned by Caleb's final, damning words, 2 military police officers arrived, their uniforms crisp, their bearing uncompromising. They flanked the park ranger, their presence instantly elevating the situation from a civil disturbance to a federal offense on military grounds. Their faces were grim, professional, and held no trace of sympathy for the weeping woman on the ground. Ma'am, you're being detained for trespassing on a restricted federal landmark and assaulting a federal officer. One of the MPs stated, his voice flat and official. He knelt and began collecting the spilled contents of her handbag as evidence. The other officer helped a now limp Isabel to her feet. Her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by the vacant, shell-shocked look of someone whose entire reality had been dismantled in a matter of minutes. The sharp clicks of her heels were gone, replaced by a defeated shuffle as she was led away. The crowd parted silently to let them pass. They watched her go, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of somber awe at the justice that had been so swiftly and powerfully delivered. As the MPs disappeared with their charge, Marcus Thorne stepped forward. He looked Caleb Voss in the eye, and with a reverence that needed no words, he brought his hand up in a slow, crisp salute. It was a gesture of profound respect, a bridge across generations, a silent acknowledgement of a shared code of honor. Caleb, standing tall amidst the lingering, offensive odor of perfume, returned the salute with perfect precision. For that brief moment, they were not two strangers. They were brothers. Then, something remarkable happened. A single person in the crowd began to clap, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire plaza erupted in a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause. It wasn't for the drama. It was for the Sentinel, for his unyielding discipline, his quiet strength, and his powerful defense of what was sacred. It was a sound of gratitude, of respect, of a community united in a moment of shared values. Caleb Voss showed no reaction. He simply concluded his salute, turned with a sharp click of his heels, and resumed his solemn, 21-step patrol. The stains on his uniform remained, but they were no longer marks of desecration. They were a testament to the storm he had weathered without flinching. His steady march continued, a silent, powerful echo in the hallowed quiet of Arlington. What is the true definition of strength? Is it the loudest voice in the room, or the silent resolve that cannot be broken? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe in the values of honor and sacrifice, comment respect to show your support for all who serve. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to tap the bell icon so you don't miss our next video, where we'll share another powerful story of dignity and courage. Until then, remember, true strength isn't about getting a reaction. It's about having a resolve that no one can shake.